In the heart of a Michigan winter, a woman vanished from a locked cabin, leaving behind a mystery that would take a decade to unravel. It was late November, and the small town of Cedar Bend was already buried under a deep, sound-absorbing snow. Eleanor Vance, a 31-year-old archival researcher from Grand Rapids, had booked a secluded lodge on the edge of the Pine River for a week of focused work. She told her brother it would be 5 days of solitude with no interruptions. The property was owned by a former civil engineer named Robert Hayes, who rented it out through a simple paper ad pinned to the local grocery store's bulletin board. No online booking, just cash and a handshake agreement that acknowledged the spotty cell service and the nearest town being a 20-minute drive on clear roads. Eleanor arrived on a Tuesday. The last time anyone saw her was at Miller's Gas and Goods, a combined service station and general store a few miles from the lodge. Surveillance video showed her buying fire starters, a bag of oranges, and a novel. She wore a dark green parka and a knitted hat. As she left, she gave a small smile to the clerk, a man named Ben, who later said she seemed calm and was looking forward to the peace. That video, time-stamped 4:12 p.m. on November 18th, would become a central piece of the investigation for years to come. Robert Hayes expected Eleanor to drop the key off by Sunday. When she didn't, he assumed the worsening weather was to blame. Heavy snow had been falling since Friday. He waited until Monday before taking his truck as far as he could and then hiking the final stretch to the property. He found the door locked from the inside. After knocking and getting no reply, he used his master key. The inside was chillingly still and cold, yet perfectly in order. A partially completed ink drawing of a pine cone sat on the desk. Her suitcase was open on the bed, her clothes neatly stacked inside. A cold cup of coffee was on the counter. Her winter boots were side by side near the entrance. Her coat was hanging on a hook, but Eleanor was gone. Hayes went back outside and scanned the property. A fresh layer of snow had covered everything, leaving no tracks, no signs of where she could have gone, just an unbroken expanse of white. He drove directly to the county sheriff's office. A massive search was launched immediately. Deputies, volunteers, and dog teams combed the woods for miles. Helicopters scanned the riverbanks. Divers checked the deeper parts of the nearby lake despite the thin ice. For over a week, they discovered nothing. Not a single mitten, not a scrap of fabric, no indication she had ever walked out of that cabin. Eleanor's brother, David, flew in and made a public appeal. He stood beside a large photo of his sister, his voice breaking as he described her as meticulous and kind. Their parents, both retired librarians, offered a reward for information. Tips trickled in, but none led anywhere. A hunter thought he'd seen someone matching her description, but the timing was off. By mid-December, the official search was called off. The lodge was secured, and Eleanor Vance's name was entered into the state's missing persons database. For almost 10 years, it remained there. Then, in March 2019, 2 hikers in the state forest land north of the Sand Dunes National Lakeshore spotted something odd protruding from a melting snowbank. They investigated and found a leather satchel, frozen, stiff, and brittle. Inside were the ruined pages of a sketchbook, a metal tin of art pens, and a university ID card with a name clearly printed, Eleanor Vance. The hikers, recognizing the name from local lore, marked the location and contacted the park rangers. Within hours, the case was reopened. Detective Sarah Miller, who had been a young officer during the initial search, was assigned. She remembered the case clearly, haunted by its strangeness. No struggle, no evidence of her leaving, yet no body. It felt wrong. She ordered a full forensic workup on the satchel. Some sketchbook pages were destroyed, but a few in the middle were salvageable. One showed a detailed drawing of a pine cone, almost identical to the one left in the lodge. Another page, dated November 20th, had a handwritten note in the margin. Heard knocking after dark. Didn't open the door. A third page, torn at the edge, had just 6 words scrawled in a rushed hand. He knows I came here alone. The discovery of that satchel didn't just reopen a file. It tore open a wound the community had tried to forget. For the families of those who had searched, it was proof she had been out there all along, beyond the boundaries they had set. Detective Miller sat in the evidence room, the satchel under bright lights, and began reviewing the original case files from the cardboard boxes beside her. The initial search had been massive but hampered by brutal weather. A blizzard had hit, dropping temperatures and visibility to dangerous levels. The search radius had expanded to cover square miles of difficult terrain, dense forest, frozen marshes, and sections of the fast-moving Pine River. They found nothing. The lead coordinator had written that the lack of any trace was statistically unlikely. He concluded that she must have been driven away or never left the lodge on her own power. David Vance had stayed in town for weeks after his sister vanished. His statement described Eleanor as careful and routine-oriented, someone who double-checked locks and kept people informed of her plans. She had been excited for the trip, not distressed. There were no known problems in her life. Her phone records showed only ordinary calls. Her car was still at the lodge, keys in the ignition. David also recalled something that seemed minor then, but now felt significant. Eleanor had called him on the morning of the 19th from the lodge's landline. She said the place was ideal, but mentioned something strange. She felt like someone had been near the property recently, even though Hayes said it hadn't been rented in weeks. She told David she'd spotted fresh cigarette ends by the woodpile and footprints leading from the trees to a side window. She wasn't frightened, just curious. David had advised her to tell Hayes, but there was no record she ever did. Miller made a note to find Robert Hayes. The original file showed he had been helpful with a solid alibi. He'd been at a professional seminar in a city hours away, confirmed by multiple sources. Still, she wanted to ask him about the cigarettes and the footprints. The forensic report on the satchel came back. The paper matched Eleanor's known sketchbooks. The handwriting was confirmed as hers, but the bag itself held new clues. Soil in the strap matched clay-based earth found near rivers, not the sandy soil around the lodge. There were also tiny blue synthetic fibers, and inside, barely visible, were a few small, dried blood stains. DNA testing was ordered. While they waited, Miller organized a new search, focused on the area where the satchel was found, a location just outside the original perimeter. It was rough, dense country, not a place one would wander into accidentally. She requested specialized equipment and a forensic anthropologist, Dr. Anna Reed, who specialized in cold cases. Using old maps and weather data, they modeled how the landscape might have moved objects over the years. The satchel's position suggested it had been carried by water. A search dog then alerted near an eroded section of riverbank. Dr. Reed's team began a careful dig. They found a piece of dark green fabric matching Eleanor's coat, then a button. After days, they uncovered small bone fragments buried over a foot down. Dental records confirmed the inevitable. The DNA from the blood in the satchel had already provided a match to David Vance. The bones were Eleanor's. But the team found something else, something that changed the case from a disappearance to a homicide. Buried a few feet from the bones, wrapped in decayed plastic, was a folding hunting knife. The blade was rusted, but the make was identifiable. Forensic analysis found microscopic traces of blood on the mechanism. The blood matched Eleanor's DNA. Miller now knew Eleanor Vance hadn't gotten lost. She had been brought to that spot. The knife became the new focus. It was a common model sold at countless stores. Miller began re-interviewing everyone connected to the case. Robert Hayes was first. Now in his 70s, he repeated his story. He'd been out of town, he didn't smoke, he didn't own that type of knife. He said he might have mentioned the rental at the grocery store but couldn't recall who was there. Miller then visited Ben, the store clerk. He still worked there. He remembered Eleanor and recalled a local handyman, Leo Walsh, had been in the store that day, stacking shelves. Ben described Walsh as a quiet man who did odd jobs and kept to himself. He smoked. Miller ran a check on Leo Walsh. He had a minor record, trespassing, a suspended license. His last known address was a rental property less than 2 miles from the lodge, a location just outside the original search zone. The landlord said Walsh had been a difficult tenant and owned an old truck and a snowmobile. Court records from a bankruptcy filing listed several knives among his assets. Miller tracked Walsh to a transient camp in the state forest. When officers found him, he didn't resist. He said he'd been waiting for this. In an interview, Walsh admitted to being near the lodge. He said he'd seen Eleanor through the window on 2 nights. He claimed he was just watching, not stalking. He admitted to owning a knife like the one found, but said he'd lost it years ago. He insisted he never spoke to her or hurt her. The evidence was circumstantial. But then Walsh added a new detail. On the second night he was there, he heard someone else moving in the woods nearby. He saw a flicker of a flashlight. He left, but later wondered if that other person had stayed. This sent Miller back to the files. She cross-referenced everyone with access to the area. One name stood out, a park ranger named Daniel Shaw. Shaw had participated heavily in the original search and knew the terrain better than anyone. Records showed he had taken unexpected personal leave right after Eleanor vanished. Miller visited the retired ranger at his home. Shaw was cooperative. He confirmed he patrolled the area and owned a knife of the same common brand. He said he'd lent one to a volunteer during the search and never got it back. The name from the volunteer sheet was Alex Porter. Miller's investigation into Porter revealed a troubling pattern. A former girlfriend had taken out a restraining order against him, describing obsessive, frightening behavior. Porter had since dropped off the grid, but a hunting license placed him in the area more recently. Miller found a primitive campsite linked to Porter. There, hidden under a pile of rocks, was a mason jar. Inside were small, terrible trophies, a button from a coat, a lock of hair, and a torn page from a sketchbook, a drawing of a pine cone signed by Eleanor Vance. This wasn't a campsite, it was a shrine. A journal was also found, filled with entries about watching people, about seeing without being seen. One entry mentioned borrowing a ranger's knife and not returning it. Another, written after the satchel was discovered, said, "I thought the river would keep the secret." Forensic evidence sealed the case. A fingerprint on the button matched Porter's and DNA on the hair matched Eleanor's. A warrant was issued. Porter was found living in a makeshift shelter deep in the forest. He didn't run. He confessed over several days. He described watching Eleanor, his obsession growing. He knocked on her door the night she vanished, wanting to talk. When she opened it, fear in her eyes, he forced his way in. A struggle ensued. He hit her and she fell unconscious. Panicked, he carried her out into the freezing night. He confessed he intended to use the knife but hesitated. He told detectives the cold claimed her before he acted. He buried her near the river and kept her belongings as tokens. He had participated in the search to monitor the investigation. Alex Porter pleaded guilty to murder. At the sentencing, David Vance told him, "You took my sister, but you don't get to keep her memory. That belongs to us." Porter was sentenced to life. For Detective Miller and Eleanor's family, it wasn't about closure, but about acknowledgement. The truth, however painful, was better than the silence. The story of Eleanor Vance is a reminder that answers can be found even after the trail has gone cold. If you appreciate deep dives into unresolved mysteries, please support this channel by giving this video a like and subscribing to Winds of Thought. What other forgotten case deserves a fresh look? Let us know in the comments.